All right. So speaking of that, returned this weekend. We talked about some of the lighter side of that last hour about going back to strength to stand. It's one of those things. Anytime you have something in your life and you just are trying to seek God's will on time and just prompted and. Since I was at the Strength to Stand conference when I got the news that my youngest son, Bronner, had stepped into heaven and, obviously the whole process and the grinding out of all of that, I just felt like, from my wife's standpoint, from the family standpoint, I guess to some degree, if I was really assessing, I never got to that point because just my wife alone was enough that stopped it. I knew that me going back to that conference would bring back a lot of, difficult things, and we were still working through the years, and Sherry's book coming out tomorrow, and tomorrow being 8 years since Bronner went to heaven. We had a long discussion about it, and she'll talk more about it tomorrow. It's kind of cool, some of the numbers and the way God does things in the Bible, and we had completed 7 years since he was gone, which is perfect and complete, and that was one of the things God, you'll see in the book, actually confirmed over and over about Bronner's life being complete and perfect, even though it was only 2.5 years here. And seeing the people that have come to know Christ through what God allowed, and he did allow it, because then you'd have to believe he couldn't stop it, and I don't serve that kind of God. So anyway, one of the things that we agreed this year too, she said, I think that it's time to go back. I think it's time for you to go back to this conference, and know that I support that wholeheartedly. I may go back with you, or you can go back on your own, but I think you should go. And I think it's time. And I think the boys that are still at home, they're going to go with the group, and they're going to go. I'd love for them to hear you speak and all the other things that'll be going on. And the Scott Dawson Evangelistic Association, they were good enough to trust me with their ministry and say, we'd love for you to come back if you feel led to do so. And so there was a lot of, I didn't know what it was going to be like. I had no way to know. I knew it had been 8 years, so it wasn't like I tried to go back the very next year. And Adler was with me and tried to document some of that, and we don't have the full thing finished, but he's got at least about a minute that kind of documents some of that, and you can watch and listen to that now, and then you'll see some footage of it, and we'll talk a little bit over that. But for about a minute, it seems to be a complete package. So this is a little bit of what it was like to go back there this past weekend. So here we go. This is this is a day I didn't know how I would really respond to it, really, because it's been 8 years since I've done this conference. It was 8 years ago. I was at this very conference, the Strength to Stand conference. I think the name is interesting that it's called Strength to Stand, with the Scott Dawson Evangelistic Association. When I got the news that Bronner had gone to heaven. And I don't know. It's not. I didn't have any plan. I just never have felt the desire to go back to where I was. And with this being the 8th year, Sherry's book coming out and that being completed, I just felt God telling me it was time to go back. So I don't know what kind of emotion it'll bring to get back there. Not only have I not been back to this conference, I haven't been back to this part of the country since then. And it used to be a place we went as a family. My wife just prayed over me before I left, and there's people praying all over this country that it's going to be powerful. And my 2 sons went with a group from our church, so I'm anxious the 2 younger sons will be there. So don't know what this is going to be like, but it's here, and it's God ordained. So if I would just be obedient, I think He's going to speak. I really do. Going out there and getting on, the stage and walking back into that area and all of that, it was powerful. But if I'm just being 100% totally transparent, the first night was tough, and honestly, I know the Lord spoke, but I didn't feel. I struggled with it a little bit. I did, and the second night it was much smoother, and. So, my apologies to the people that were there the first night. But I know it was God's going to do His thing, and people's lives were changed by it. But I admit, because I was trying to figure out exactly, you only got 35 minutes,
right?
And you're trying to come back to try to lay it all out and say what you think needs to be said. And one of the things too is Sherry and I both know, and this show has been in the same place, is the message that God has given through this is not a popular message. It's not palatable. It's not tickling of the ears. This book does not tickle your ears. and the message that God has given us from, the day this happened going forward. It's not the message that's going to have people flock to it and say, hey, I'll tell you what, I'm in for that. That sounds fantastic. But I think the thing that everybody has to understand is there's nothing that is said in this book, and there's nothing that is said through the message that he has given me that isn't right out of the Bible. It's not commentary, and as I talked about at this conference, it's almost amazing. I could tell that some of the things that we were talking about straight out of the Scriptures about suffering, and Jesus saying, if you're going to go with me, Matthew 16:24, deny yourself and pick up your cross. Well, what is deny myself? Now, how in the face of culture is that? What, deny me, my favorite God?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
how will I put that on Instagram?
And he says pick up the cross. And I talked about this, and I don't mean to dumb this down, and I'm not saying that when you do this it's bad or, oh, you're in sin. But I do want us to really think about, Rick included, how we think. I'll go further. Bronner's death is not my cross to bear. Arthritis absolutely isn't your cross to bear. Okay, what Jesus is saying is, are you ready to die? Everybody in that culture, when they're carrying a cross, they're carrying it to die. He's not just rambling, the cross will be hard to carry. No, what he's saying is deny yourself and get a cross and let's go to die to ourselves. And when you carry a cross, you're carrying it to die. And like we talk about in one of these things, one of two things is going to happen. It's not like, hey, man, it might or what. One of two things is going to happen to every single one of us. We're either going to die. You will die if the Lord tarries long enough. Or you going to be here when he returns. And in both those scenarios, guess what? It's the same result. You're standing in the presence of the Lord. And what's going to happen? This is not some little story that we keep talking about, keep putting on the back burner. It's really going to happen. And how about this? It's closer to happening in both scenarios to every one of us today than it was yesterday. We're either closer to being here when he returns or we're closer to dying. Both those things happened in the last 24 hours. And I think what God is doing through all of this, there's people doing stuff all over the world. Every one of us is called to this, not just some, is to say there's some urgency to this. There's some urgency to this. And you know what? This thing of, every day's a Friday and your best life now and all that garbage, that's a distraction. That's garbage. I mean, that's not the gospel. Jesus is not a hippie who goes around singing folk songs. The God the Father is not a folksy grandfather that sits out on the back porch of his cabin with some tales of wisdom. This is serious stuff. This is the great I am. This is the beginning and the end. This is the King of Kings. And you know what? He does say, hey, if you're willing to go with me, I may say we're going to suffer. But to live as Christ, to die as gain. And you know what? To die as gain is easy. You know what the hard part is? To live as Christ. That's what's hard. The dying part, that's easy. But to live as Christ, that's where it gets tough. And that's what he's called us to do. And so you'll see that, those of you that are walking through the book, and hopefully I didn't get in the way of God trying to make sure that message, and it's not a popular message. Nobody will say, I'll tell you what, I like that message. But I'm going to tell you what, it's well worth it, because this is not it. You got to stop trying to create heaven on earth. It ain't here. We'll be back. More of the Rick and Bubba Show comes your way right after this.
Rick and Bubba, Rick and Bubba.